We're here with Cathy Boyd-Withers, Learning Skills Specialist, on the topic of academic reading. Welcome, Cathy.
Hi, Brian.
Students at university face a lot of reading. What steps can they take to manage the reading load?
Well, reading is certainly an important component of any course that you take, and there can be a lot of it for sure. I think the best tip is to start right away, right from the beginning. Make sure that you keep up with the reading if at all possible. So that means you're going to have to factor in a fair bit of time every week for reading so that you can keep up as you go along. It may take more time than you expect it to at first, and that's okay. You just have to plan for that. So I think it's really important to just get going, launch right in. A lot of students have told me it can be helpful to read for the same course at the same time. So you have a structure and a routine. Every Tuesday from 2 to 4, I'm going to read for my psychology class or whatever. Just so that that's part of your ongoing study routine, is to leave some time for reading.
I've heard various strategies for reading. Some of them have fancy names like PQ3R. What does that acronym stand for, and how does the strategy support reading?
PQ3R stands for Preview, Question, Read, Recite, and Review. And it's a strategy that asks you to, first of all, begin with an overview of the reading. We call that the preview. Some people call it SQ3R for survey, but it's the same idea. To get a picture of what the reading is going to be about before you actually even start to launch into the details. I like the imagery of reading in layers. So first you do like an overview, almost like an archaeological dig, where you sort of map out the territory first. Gives you a little bit of a framework of meaning that you're going to start to hang the details on as you go into the deeper levels of the reading. So that's the P, the preview part. The Q is questions. So create some questions for yourself even before you start the reading and as you go along through the preview. The questions might come from the course itself. What do I think the prof wants me to get out of this reading? As you do the preview, you'll start to get oriented towards what the reading is about. And that may also bring up some questions for you as well. So that when you actually start to do the reading in more detail, you're looking for the answers to the questions. It's always easier to sort of be reading with an aim in mind and a purpose, looking for things, than to just sort of read cold, especially academic reading, which can be quite dense and often fairly difficult. And then we have our 3 R's, read, recite, review. So the reading is to go through, once you've got a preview of the reading, now you're going to go through section by section. As you do that, or maybe pause after you've read a little bit of a section, the idea of reciting is to try to make those ideas your own. Kind of recite them in your own words, paraphrase them. And then pause at strategic points along the reading or when you're done that reading for the day to review. Ask yourself, okay, what have I learned from this reading? And connect it. What are we doing in the course? How does this connect to what we're doing this week in the lecture? What about last week? Are there other readings this week that I have to read? How does this reading connect to those?
It sounds like it'd be really a helpful strategy that gets into the reading and helps you really grapple with the meaning of the reading. But do students complain that this takes longer than this sort of cold reading that you described?
Yes, and again, I think when students approach academic reading, they need to understand you're being asked to do quite a difficult task. We think of reading as, well, I'll just sit down and read it. But that's not what academic reading is like. So academic reading takes more time than most students realize at first. And you need to just give yourself enough time to be able to get into that reading and understand what it's about.
I've heard a lot about the term active reading. Can you maybe describe what people mean by active reading? And is PQ3R one of those strategies that gets you there?
Yes, definitely. PQ3R is a way to sort of help you be more active in your reading. Active reading refers to the idea that academic reading is more like a conversation with the text, where you're trying to look at that, figure out what you need from it for your purposes as a student, for relating to the course. You're also trying to get what you need out of the reading. That may mean, actually, you don't necessarily have to do every academic reading from, reading the first word right straight through to the end. So that PQ3R idea gets that idea of reading, maybe approaching the reading more than once at different levels of detail, and so on.
And how do people know that what they're picking up in the reading is the important stuff? You mentioned reading to a purpose. How do I know that what I'm reading is what's important to the professor or to the course? How do I know what's less important in an assigned reading?
Well, you have to try and experiment a little, and then pay attention to the feedback around you from the course itself. Most professors want you to do the reading ahead of the class. It's a very good strategy because it sets you up to listen better when you get to the lecture time. You have some idea of what the themes might be in the lecture, and then you can test out the themes that you picked up from the reading. Is that what the instructor is talking about in the course? Or did they get something totally different from the reading than you did? Then you want to go back in maybe afterwards and see, how did they get that out of the reading when I didn't? So that's one way, the feedback and other feedback from the course as well. Do you seem to be following? Are you understanding? How about your assignments? Are you doing okay? And all of that. There's a lot of information available for you if you just sort of pay a little more attention and increase your awareness.
And what do people mean by critical reading?
Critical reading is an opportunity to practice your critical thinking skills as you read. No matter what course you're taking, they want you to learn critical thinking. And critical thinking is about thinking at deeper levels. It's not just about processing information and memorizing facts and figures and that sort of thing. It's about learning what questions we ask in this course, how we address those questions, what evidence is brought to bear on those questions, what things are left out, what examples support whatever case the author is making, and so on. So critical reading means approaching the reading with questions like that in mind and thinking sometimes even beyond the page of what you're reading to connect with the course and other readings and deeper questions that you're learning to ask in that course.
It seems to imply there's a level of memory that has to come along with this. That is to say, if I'm somebody who thinks I don't have a great memory to begin with, I'm going through all these steps of reading. I've got to find some way to hold on to this information if I'm putting forward that much time and effort to the reading task. If I'm hearing you, the reading task is a lot more complex than just sitting in front of the words and moving my eyes left and right. So if I'm making that investment of time, I want to be sure that what I go away with stays with me. What are some ways that I can make sure I can hold on to that, whatever it is I've found?
Well, memory is an aspect of it, but it's actually not the most important aspect, especially at first. I always tell students when you're going through the reading, especially for the first time, don't even worry about remembering anything yet. Ask yourself, do I understand this? Because if you understand it and you're getting that picture of what it's about, you're structuring the information in your mind. So again, that's that idea of reading in layers where you have an overview, you're thinking about the course and the themes and how the pieces connect. Then it's always much easier to remember information that's meaningful. Students often get into trouble, and often very well-meaning students, conscientious students who's put a lot of time in, because they try to memorize every detail right from the beginning, and they feel overwhelmed. Everything seems important. How do I know? Well, by doing a little bit of that layering, and structuring the information so that you have an idea of what it's about, and then you have a place to put the details when you get there, and then they're much easier to remember later on down the road.
So if I'm making meaning as I'm going along and I understand the content, I'm more likely to remember. But what's the role of note-taking when I'm reading?
I would say if you're going to take notes as you read, and it's very helpful for many students, not everybody, everyone is different, don't just copy over. The temptation is to just sit there copying over again. Heaven knows you paid enough money for the textbook in the first place. You don't need to copy it over. Make sure that if you're taking notes, you're thinking, you're processing. So you can actually use your notes to help you structure the information a little bit. If you find it's taking you a really long time to take notes, then I would say pause at intervals to jot down just a few key points. That's one way of also testing yourself to see, am I getting it? Do I have a sense of what's important and what isn't? You might be wrong at first, but you'll find out when you go to class and as you continue in the course, whether you are actually pulling out the key points. And you're going to have to figure out what's important versus what's just supporting detail. Anyway, at some point in the course, you might as well start practicing right away. So notes can be really, really helpful study aids and memory aids, but only if they're sort of ways of thinking on paper, and maybe even restructuring the information around key themes from the course, for example, or comparing different sections of the reading and jotting highlights down so that you're always thinking as you take your notes.
And what about those students who encounter readings that are really, really difficult? They've been assigned readings in courses and they look at those readings and they think, oh my goodness, I'm not really remembering anything out of this. Never mind remember it. I don't really even think I understand it. What should they do in that situation?
Well, I think you have to not be too discouraged. A lot of academic reading can be really difficult. It is a learned skill, especially for more difficult readings. I think students do need to be prepared to engage with the reading more than once often on difficult readings. Try, think of it as a puzzle that you're trying to crack, that you're going back again to try again. Again, think about what you're doing in that course. Take your best shot at the reading, read before the lecture or the tutorial, so that at the very least you can approach the prof or the TA with questions. Maybe they'll pick up on those more difficult aspects of the readings. A lot of academic reading is really difficult and often can be open to different interpretations depending on the field that you're in. And that's actually okay. That's part of academic learning. That discussion and challenging the ideas and so on. So again, think of it as a conversation and a back and forth with the text.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.